Hello, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel from Techstrong Group, and you're watching or listening to or participating in another DevOps Unbound. For those of you who may not be familiar with DevOps Unbound is a joint production between us here at Techstrong Group and our good friends at Tricentis. We've been doing it, as I said, for 3 years. And generally, we do a DevOps Unbound episode about every 2 weeks. 2 out of 3 of every one of these episodes are pre-recorded, and we play them on Techstrong TV. They're streamed on Techstrong TV through our Techstrong network that includes LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook and all of the Techstrong sites. And then they're also available on demand on Techstrong.tv. And oftentimes on our DevOps.com site as well. However, 1 out of every 3 of these episodes are a special episode. They're a live roundtable episode. And we record them live with what I like to call a studio audience. And believe me, I'd love to have you all in a studio in front of us and make it much more interactive. But that would be difficult if you just look at our public chat and see where everyone is logging in from. It's truly a global audience, and do take the time, make sure your chat works, tell us where you're logging in from. It always gets me excited to see exotic places out there that I'd like to visit. But anyway, our live audience, if it's not studio, really are the drivers, the catalysts of our Techstrong Live roundtables, because we want to hear what you have to say. We want you to ask the questions. We want you to drive the conversation. We want to hear what your opinions are and everything else going with what we're talking about. So please take the time, log in, tell us where you're from. We use the Big Marker webinar platform here, and for most of you, that means that the right-hand side of your webinar is going to have a great communications window. And up at the top of it, you'll see it says chat. There's different kinds of chat in here. Public chat is just that, public. You put it in there, everyone on here can see it. Our presenters, I don't know if you don't see that unless you're a presenter, but we have a private channel for that. And then you can go one-on-one private to anyone on here if someone asks a question and you want to give an answer that maybe is not for public consumption. However, people who you private chat to have the option of whether they want to chat to you or not. So don't mistake this for Match.com or something like that. But feel free to chat. Now, if you want to pose a question to our panel, next to where it says chat, you'll see it's probably grayed out for most of you, but it's Q&A. When you click on that, it'll turn black. And that is if you want to put a question or a comment directly to the panel that I'll then elevate up to our panel, and we'll do our best to discuss that as well. We have a great panel today, and we're perfectly capable of talking more than an hour on what we're going to talk about today. But these things really get special when you participate. So please take the time. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're registered. We're glad you came in to join us. But now let's finish it and let's really hear what you're about, or what you're thinking about and what's going on. Now, I did mention this is a co-production with Tricentis. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a quick shout out. Tricentis has been an amazing partner for us. They help us with the guests, they help us with the topics, they help us put it together. And it's been just a fantastic relationship. We couldn't do this without them. So a big shout out to our friends at Tricentis. At DevOps Unbound, we cover the gamut of DevOps, right? From left to right and all the way in between. Today's show is a really special show I've been looking forward to. It's called Why I Love DevOps, From Tools to Teams. And really, it's a precursor to something that Mitchell Ashley, our head of Techstrong Research, is working on, which is a new report called DevOps Next. And it'll be part of a bigger campaign we're doing here called Got DevOps. We think that DevOps, March 14th is 10 years since I first published DevOps.com. DevOps has been around now 12, 13 years, right? Since the first DevOps days in Ghent, Belgium. We think DevOps is embarking on a new era. I don't want to call it DevOps 2.0. I hate that. But it's the next step in the evolution of DevOps, where instead of cobbling together tools, a lot of open source tools, and nothing amount with open source, but cobbling together a lot of point solutions. We're seeing platforms, we're seeing purpose-built, we're seeing much more sophisticated DevOps solutions that empower and encompass platform engineering and SRE and different kinds of ops and everything else that we're seeing out there, working closely with Agile and ITSM and other frameworks. This really is the flowering of DevOps, if you will, right? Reaching its potential. And maybe that's not been your experience. Maybe you feel something else. I'd love to hear about what you think about that. But that's what we're going to be talking about today, right? And this aspect, DevOps has always had a cultural aspect and a tools aspect, right? We've seen a ton of evolution in the tools, but I think we've also seen a broad acceptance of the cultural aspects of DevOps, especially like in DevSecOps even, right? So that being said, that kind of sets the stage here, right? We're gonna go back a little bit to the origins of DevOps, because you can't understand where you are and where you're going unless you know where you've been. With that said now, though, let me introduce what I think is an amazing panel for us here today. First of all, joining us from just outside of Amsterdam, but in the Netherlands, is our good friend Andreas Prins. Andreas, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot. I still have a lot of passion for both testing, by the way, Martin. I started my career in software testing, so Tricentis was already around, or not already in the beginning, but pretty early on. And I've been a DevOps coach and Agile coach in ING for many years. So the love of process optimization, of culture, of tools, of pushing teams to the next level is really, really deep in my heart. And then I joined the dark side of software. So I started in a product company focused on release and deployment automation. So really at the dev side of the house. And the last 2.5 years, I joined the ops side of DevOps on an observability company. I'm currently leading StackState as CEO.
Yep. And StackSite is another great company and a perfect example of what I was talking about, right? I don't want to call it next gen, but that's what DevOps Next, the report Mitchell's doing, right? It's this evolution. This isn't DevOps 12 years ago.
Yeah. No.
Anyway, let me next introduce Martin Klaus. Martin's been on with us before, but Martin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Alan, and thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Martin Klaus. I currently run custom engineering at Tricentis, which is a new function that we just set up to help customers with the adoption of automation across the entire portfolio, but also to work on AI and some of the more newer technologies. And previously had different roles in marketing, product management, and so forth. And I've also had a background in cloud native application platforms, containers, Kubernetes. So I've a broad spectrum of experiences from infrastructure to application platforms, CI/CD, DevOps, test automation. And I've been with Tricentis for almost 4 years now.
Speaking of cloud native, we were talking off stage. Martin is going to be at the Cloud Native KubeCon event in Paris next month. I believe Andreas will too.
Definitely.
I'm thinking, Mitch, maybe we do a DevOps Unbound episode. We'll be streaming there all week. And maybe we could do some DevOps Unbound stuff while we're there, while we're all in person. Mitch, I think you're on mute.
That came up in the green room before the show started. So, yeah, I think
we'll work on that. Our third panel member is also a delight to have her on. She's been on panels with us before, though I don't think she's ever done one of the live ones here. But, well, I'm going to let her introduce herself. Hope Lynch. Hope, tell us about you.
Hi, I am I will say for all of the people who joined are in North Carolina, I'm here with you. I'm also in North Carolina. Senior Director of Platform at CloudBees. I've been at CloudBees a little more than 3 years. And CloudBees, everything for your developer needs, basically. If you're a developer and you need a tool, we probably have it. I have worked in a range of roles, much like when I was hearing Andreas talk about his background. I've led agile transformations. One of the more interesting roles, I was a product manager for an IoT platform. If you want to know about DevOps, working with hardware teams, I have some stories for you. There are stories there. Systems engineering teams, when that was the word instead of platform engineering. Long history in technology, still love it, still here. Love the rapid pace of change, and that's what keeps me around.
You're a joy to have on, Hope. Thank you so much. Hey, Andreas, someone noticed your little Land Rover back there. I don't know if you want to tell us about that.
Yeah, so actually the story starts on the other side. So over there are all the Lego architecture cities that I visited. So from Paris, Dubai, and obviously New York, right? Being there in the middle as well. And then someone said, but you also need to have something in the background that you can dream about. And that's actually the Land Rover. So that's my next adventure. One day when I earn a lot of money, I will buy such a beautiful Land Rover.
All right.
That's awesome.
Excellent. Love it. Let me introduce our last panel. Not our last, but the last one I'm going to introduce. It's my co-host and partner in crime here at Techstrong, Mitch Ashley. Mitchell, welcome. If you want to tell people a little bit about yourself.
Oh, good to be here. And, like our panel, I've held many roles in product development, software development, networking, security. And so that's why I work with, one of the reasons why Alan and I have worked with each other over the several years now. And have
more than several, Mitchell.
Yeah, I'm being kind. Yeah. We're working both in the CTO role, but also running the research for Techstrong. It's great to co-host this with you. We've been doing these kinds of things forever.
Absolutely. And again, just a reminder, guys, use the chat, use QA, anything you want to bring up or talk about, it's fair game. So look, we said we were going to start at the beginning of DevOps, and I think I mentioned, for me, Patrick Dubois coins the term, and the very first, and it's based on a lot of presentations, one done by John Allspar, right? 10X, stuff like that. But the first DevOps days is generally noticed as sort of the beginning of this DevOps movement. It was in Ghent, Belgium. It was arranged by Patrick. The only person from the US there was our good friend John Willis, who then came home and told another good friend of ours, Damon Edwards, about it. And they organized the first DevOps days in the US in Silicon Valley. And I want to say that was also in 2011. So just a few months, maybe 6 or 8 months after Ghent. For anyone who's really interested in the history of DevOps, though, I will tell you that John and Damon have done a video. It's up on YouTube, and I think it was from DevOps Cafe, which was the podcast they used to do way back. And they go through kind of the history, of early DevOps movement and some of the players in there. So if you aren't, I don't want to spend all of our time on this, but if you're really interested in it, go check that out. It's DevOps Cafe, John Willis and Damon Edwards. And Damon does an amazing job. He kind of chronicles the whole thing. But needless to say, DevOps burst on the scene 2013. By the time I published in 2014, it was literally on fire. But like any new technology, it goes through that Gartner hype cycle, right? The peak of hype, right? And then in the trough of disillusionment. And DevOps followed that, right? The hype and what DevOps was going to do for us, it could never have lived up to its promise or some of the hype around it, right? I mean, this was just it's similar to what we're seeing with AI right now, right? it's going to do everything for us. It's going to make life better. It'll cure cancer, and it just doesn't. But DevOps hit the trial of disillusionment hard, right? I would say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, 3 years ago. And still, for some people, it is, where they say, yeah, it doesn't work as well as it was advertised. It's hard. That was something we heard a lot from people. DevOps is hard. This hard stuff. It's not easy. And when we look at DevOps, there was always this sort of bifurcation of the cultural learnings, the 3 ways, if you will, of Gene Kim's Phoenix project, right? The cultural aspects of DevOps, of building teams, cross-functional teams, versus the tools. Right? There was a Jenkins before there was a DevOps. Right? Here we are 12 years later. Jenkins still, from the last numbers I saw, is 40% plus of the CI/CD market. It was about a 15-year-old tool. So, but Jenkins has evolved too. Anyway, I want to throw it out to the panel. What do you see along the lines of the evolution of DevOps, whether it's cultural tools or something else? I'm not big on calling on people, but if you'd like to speak up, go ahead. Hope, I see you nodding.
Oh yeah, I think about when you said 2013. For me, there is a clear delineator there, because that was the year I was leading the systems engineering team, which is really a platform engineering team. And in that year, we had an ops team and we had a development team. And the pain of transitioning developed tools to the ops team so they could support it, the pain and the conversations just going back and forth, the lag that we had, the lack of visibility we had, but then the transition later to bringing those teams together, making sure they work together. There were people who were at war with each other and those wars ceased, right? Because now the problem, it was theirs. It wasn't someone else's, on the other side of the wall that it was being thrown to. But DevOps has transitioned, and I feel it has matured in some really good ways. I felt, that was the beginning. It was very fundamental. We didn't know what we were doing sometimes. But there's so much more information available now.
Can I make one comment on that? Because what I really missed from the early days. So today there's so much tooling, right? If you put culture and tools next to each other, in the early beginnings there wasn't that much tooling as there is today, right? So yes, there was, but it was predominantly culture, right? Just breaking down barriers, saying you own it, right? You've built it, you own it, you run it, right? So it was more the conversations that started, and finally talking about responsibility. And yes, there were tools, right? Every category back then almost existed. These days, I would say we almost are leaning too much towards the tools, right? And what you now see is a kind of new movements, right? With developer experience, people thinking about, it's not about pipelines and security and all these type of things, but where is the human aspect of it? And I do think that's a kind of right going every 5, 6, 7 years back and forth. But the beauty I found in the early days was, you mentioned the agile coaching, right? Really the people aspect, because there were not that much tools matured in the market as there are today. So that was to me the beauty of the early days of DevOps.
Yeah, and just to build on what Andrea said, I speak with a lot of customers, and I was just talking with somebody this past week who works in retail. And what has changed in that business is that what used to be the holiday shopping season is now happening almost every week. There's usually some type of promotion. There is social media that's now driving a lot of the purchases in terms of what's trending. It's almost, I think he coined the phrase of attention economy, and because things are changing so quickly. And if you think about the business aspects that are driving companies to move faster and try different things, that actually has some real implications on organizations. And I would say, the pandemic was an inflection point for a lot of companies to learn new skills, new ways of collaboration, to deploy tools in new ways that they always wanted to deploy in a certain way, but it was not that critical ever to drive that pervasive change across the board. But I would say we've seen probably more DevOps transformation in the last couple of years than we've seen in the last 20 years. And that was all driven from a business standpoint to figure out new ways of collaboration, automation, communication. And that's applies to all organizations, regardless of the industry you're in, from transportation, not just financial services or healthcare and others. It's everywhere. And one aspect that I always think of is, like, if you think about what indicates DevOps success in some ways, I always like to think of it as deployment frequency, because ultimately that is a measure of delivering functionality into production to end users. And while DevOps has always been thought of as this ideal end state, and there have always been, big companies that have done that, like AWS and others, like deploying multiple thousand times a minute or something like that. For most companies, the reality was not sort of daily deployments, but biweekly agile type. And that was already a huge step from where they were, thinking of 6-month deployments, annual deployments, to go to biweekly deployment schedules. Now I see a lot more companies are really sort of embracing this daily deployments and much more rapid sort of a release cycle. And honestly, I think that's a really good sign, because it means that the overall experience and understanding and skill set has improved in industry. It's not just the elite performers that are doing it well, and everybody else is way behind. Now we've seen the overall level and maturity has increased dramatically in every organization, not just those that are building applications in-house, but also from an enterprise back office standpoint. It's actually a pervasive culture. This is like the way we do things now. And that's a great sign, I think.
Yes, I agree. This is a cultural shift. And the wonderful thing that I don't think is talked about enough that you brought to my mind is how DevOps sometimes changes whole organizations, whole companies. They change the way they function and operate because DevOps was the catalyst for them to understand how they could do things differently and in a better way.
Yeah. And at the same time, some people are calling out culture and process. So thanks for calling that out. I thought about it a lot. And my hypothesis is, for management, it's super easy to say, hey, this is a new tool. Let's use that tool, right? And you purchase a license, right? And a couple people start using it. And then you call the job done, right? The tool is in, we work with it, right? There are scans happening, whatever, pipelines. But if it comes down to culture, it's almost like, I don't know who has teenagers here in the audience. It's my daily struggle. It's like raising children, right? In the beginning, you say, this is the rule, right? Follow it. But then when they grow up, and at our work, we are grown-ups, right? You need to explain the reasoning behind the rule. Why are we doing stuff? Why is the process like this? Why is there compliance? Can we change it, yes or no? And I really feel that we're walking away too much or too often from this whole, let's explain, let's truly put at the table, why are we doing stuff? Why do we want to change it? Because otherwise, well, culture won't change. So I really feel with everyone who's struggling with that, it's continuous conversations to make that happen.
If I could jump in. So in addition to DevOps.com, of course, I was also one of the co-founders of the DevOps Institute. And that was also 8 years old, whatever, but about a year or two after I did DevOps.com. And DevOps Institute's DevOps training was more on what we called soft tech rather than the hard tech. So we tend to emphasize a lot of the culture process kind of stuff rather than tools, because the tool vendors were doing a good job on tool training. And I will tell you, my lesson from those days was a lot of people, if they can't touch it, smell it, and taste it, it's not real to them. And so culture, especially, they thought, a lot of people said, it is just, too soft, too hard. You can't measure it. It's subjective, not objective. It's hokey. Give me a good tool, right? You go faster. But
Yeah.
interestingly, now fast forward to today, why I love DevOps. The cultural aspect is people acknowledge the cultural aspect. You don't hear developers as much saying, well, it ran on my machine, right? Or the ops guy, or even worse, the security people. When I first started preaching DevSecOps to my security, because I come from security, like at RSA, where I do our DevSecOps thing now, 8 years on Monday, it was war, right? Because the security people said, I don't care what you call it or what you say. No one cares about security. Only we care about security. And of course, the developers said, those people, they're just the people who say no. Everything is no to them. If I listened to them, we'd never get anything done. And so it was really hard blending those two. But look where we are now. Most of the larger DevOps companies, including CloudBees, consider themselves a DevSecOps company, right? So that's been a huge success in my mind.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I wanted to bring some stuff in. We've been having conversations going here on the chat. Nadia said that for her, culture has more weight. It's difficult to drive, but worth it. Once you have it, process, tool, technology, and policy, adoption, change get managed easily. I don't know if I'd say easily, but I do think she's right. Nadia, you're right? Yeah. Culture smooths the bumps out to make these other things happen.
Yeah, and it's also because what Victorio says, the purpose gets more clear, right? So if you understand again, right, if the culture, right, you agree upon why do we exist, right? What are we striving for as a company, and how do we deliver IT from a more cultural perspective? So then, yeah, absolutely, everything else will follow. What I always find fascinating is observe. And because I do believe culture is a kind of top-down and bottom-up, right? It's both sides. But observe your senior management in times of pressure at the company, right? And then you will discover the real culture, right? What if that audit comes in, right? And you get all these red flags or these penalties even, right? Or what if there's a humongous round of layoffs going on, right? What is then the base behavior that they fall back to? And that will tell you something about your culture. And if that's a kind of negative or down, well, you still need to continue having the conversations, because that's not a healthy environment to improve process, tools, and all these other type of things.
One thing I'd like to mention, I also put it in the chat. I worked with an organization in the past when I was leading an agile transformation, and they wanted to be a different kind of organization than they were. And the first thing they wanted to leap into was, hey, go and talk to the teams and make them work differently. And I said, but does that work with your culture, right? So we used the competing values assessment, which, let me tell you, I love this tool because it makes culture concrete. And we were able to measure, to your point, Andreas, the difference in the culture of leadership versus the culture of the people on the ground, measure in points what that gap was. And over the course of a year, we were able to narrow that gap and start moving toward the culture that everyone said they desired, right? Because now we had concrete measures and points that we could work around. But it is challenging when someone says, oh, we want to be like Meta, but their culture is more like, the DMV, right? Yeah. It's a challenge. You develop software differently, and DevOps is different in those organizations based on the culture.
Yeah, and just to add one other point to Hope, I think let's be clear what the role of tools are. It's to enhance automation, right? That's one of the main principles of DevOps. But as I just posted a funny joke here, like culture eats tools for breakfast, not just strategy, but tools also. Or a good painter can create beautiful artwork even with a bad brush, but it doesn't work the other way around. And you think about sort of if you're deploying tools to enhance automation, and I think a lot of organizations started with build pipelines, CI/CD as sort of like the fundamental building block for like a DevOps platform that ultimately also then expanded into testing and test automation, infrastructure as code, observability, shift left of performance testing and other things. It always required a very clear contract of all the participants in the process, right? So that to your point about DevSecOps, actually, Alan, the security teams and the ops teams and everybody else who's involved understands what's going on, how we're doing it, and what's going on when things break, and how can we resolve that situation, right? Because ultimately, if you don't have the culture, if you don't have sort of that agreement in place, the tools will not help you at all. And I shouldn't say this is a tools vendor, but I'm saying it anyways because that's a reality.
One of the things that also really strikes me about DevOps that I appreciate is it changed kind of the unit of work that we work in. And some of it can be the software architecture like cloud native and things like that. But a lot of it is, I remember back to the days of integration Fridays, build Fridays, right? And who broke the build and all that kind of fun stuff, which is not fun. And now into this flow, it's got more flow into it. And it surfaces things, makes things, issues, progress, whatever it might be, surfaces it more early in the process, which always makes it to me is always better because you have an opportunity to address the bigger issues sooner than later.
Can I address one concern there of that whole sooner than later?
Sure. Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree, right? So no doubt there. At the same time, I do see a lot of engineers, right? Whether or not you're a testing engineer, a developer, a platform engineer, just struggling with the humongous amount of disciplines they need to master into a single person, right? And I don't desire back to the days that we have silos, right? But sometimes, right, the pressure is really high, right? And then we've shifted security left. We're now shifting observability left, right? There's the CI/CD a long time ago, right? That's on the team's responsibility list. So somewhere having separate DevOps teams who take care of the tool set, right? The tool stack, all the automation, and then the platform teams on the other hand doing the cloud native part of platforming. I really think that is healthy, right? And then not necessarily only provide the tool, but focus on the tool, and then being a kind of a coaching squad around it that will train the philosophies, the methodologies, to let people actually work with it rather than, okay, I receive a tool, now it's my duty, let's fix it. And that's I do think sometimes a forgotten aspect, right? And we all work from home. We don't see people suffering these days, right, from the mental load they carry. So that's to me an aspect of culture, which is coming from all the expectations that we're having that we should address in a proper way as well.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I hear about a lot is that DevOps actually has gotten quite complicated. If you think about what developers need to worry about and think about from planning to security checking and compliance and validation, it actually, the amount of time you spend coding has decreased dramatically, and the time you spend on doing all the other things that you have to get done is increased dramatically. And I think that's sort of driving a lot of organizations to think about what their internal developer platform should look like to help developers stay in the flow, and think more about like functionality and coding and applications and how do we deliver value, and less time on the plumbing. And so IDPs are a great example of that, but also platform engineering, some of the other concepts that are becoming much more prevalent. And I see a lot more organizations now think about like, how do we, basically get back to like a platform as a service type concept, because, it has gotten a little bit complicated with all the different tools and things that people have to think about. And we're now, I think, in this phase of recalibrating like our infrastructure and figuring out like how do we have done so much in terms of delivering more with more. Now it's like, how do we do more with less, and simplifying things quite a bit again.
So, I saw, well, I was going to say recent, but it's probably from 6 months old now, a survey that developers actually only spend about 30 to 35% of their time coding, right? 65, whatever, the rest of the time they're not coding. And part of and this is, you got to be honest and call a spade a spade. It's not, DevOps has contributed to this, is that we've shifted a lot left onto the backs of the developers, right? I remember when DevOps.com we first launched, everyone said, that's going to be the end of the testers. No more Q&A. It's going to be automated. It's going to be done by the developers, way left over here.
End of operations.
Why would I take the highest paid person in this food chain and throw yet more stuff on their plate to prevent them from doing what I'm paying them all that money to do? And so it never, if you took the panic out of it and looked at it logically, it never made sense that we were going to eliminate the testers, right? Maybe their day-to-day job or tools they use would change a little bit. But someone has to do testing, and saying that the developers should do testing, that the developers should be the security admin or security pro, it was kind of, I think it was pie in the sky. Yes, developers need to be aware of security, right? And I've never met a developer who raised his hand and said, I can't wait to develop some insecure code because I'm just about getting it done. I don't care whether it's secure or not. No one says that, right? They all have pride in what they do. These are crafts, skilled people who do development. By the way, same thing with testers. I learned this from one of the, I think it was a co-founder at Tricentis, which is there is a cadre of professional testers. These people, testing isn't a way station on the way to becoming a developer. It's not a place for a junior developer. There are testing professionals who spend their entire career honing their craft and becoming great testers. Same thing with security people. Not everyone aspires to be a developer. I think that's one of the lessons of DevOps, right there. Yep. Pie-shaped people, is that what this was going on here?
T-shaped is what they're talking about.
T-shaped and broom-shaped.
Some of us may be pie-shaped some days, but
I just came out of my pie-shaped era. Anyway, we spent a lot of time on culture, and I think rightfully so. And I think it's not easy and it's not always successful, but it's been a big accomplishment of DevOps. Let's talk a little bit about tools, though, because each of you, with the exception of Mitchell and me, work for tool vendors. How have your tools evolved to be better, faster, or have they?
One of the things that we are focusing on now a lot more at CloudBees is the connection between developer experience and developer happiness, right? Does the tool reduce friction? Does the tool just make it easier for them to get done whatever they need to do? Again, when we talk about the early days, right? A lot of the teams I was managing, we were building our own tools. It was taking forever. Teams are still doing a lot of scripting and other things now as needed for automation. But if you bring a tool in-house, does that tool make it easy to get started quickly and do their work so they can, as you mentioned, Alan, be those, creative geniuses that they are?
Agreed.
So just to comment on that, we're deep into the observability space, and I'll share 3 learnings. So the first one is time to value. Alan, if you mentioned that 65% is wasted on non-coding, right? Non-feature development. That's also in setting up tools and connecting tools, etc. So I do think every tool vendor these days should really think about time to value, right? How much effort does it take before you get there? And the whole product-led growth and that entire movement that supports it. That's one. The other thing is, what is the knowledge that you can pre-package in your solution that as soon as you shift the practice left, observability practice, moving to the developers, that they don't need to build a Kubernetes understanding first before they can observe their apps running on Kubernetes, to call out an example. And that is applicable to every domain. And then the third angle, and that's probably a little provoking one, but you should also really think about, where does innovation come from? And in the observability space, we see a lot of open source frameworks doing pieces of observability, which is perfectly nice. But then what we see happening is that the platform teams or the DevOps teams, they start to do the innovation with the open source frameworks, right? So let's imagine HSBC, a big bank, right? Just as an example, bad example probably, whatever, a big Optum, right? Healthcare provider. They have teams who invent observability solutions on top of an open source stack. My question would be, is that the purpose of Optum, right? Or a big, large bank, Bank of America, to do that inventions? Or should they focus on feature development? And that's a third angle that I would like to take into account from a tooling perspective is, hey, where do you want to invest your knowledge on as a company? Do you purchase at Tricentis, right? That develops innovative capabilities from a testing perspective, or CloudBees from a CI/CD, or StackState, in this case from observability? Or do you go your own because you think it's cool or important or whatever reason? So these are three angles for me that we as a company always take into account: time to value, knowledge base, as well as the innovation taking place in the solution rather than in our customer's place.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the other point I would like to make is that we see that a lot of teams aren't just developers or testers or ops people. It's actually now gotten a little bit bigger, and also include business analysts, or some companies even call them biz testers, that are less technical, but they have a really good understanding of the business requirements, the business logic, how applications should work from an end user standpoint. And so there's a need for basically democratizing quality engineering, quality automation, test automation, even for less technical, I'm not going to say non-technical, but less technical team members. And so we definitely see increased interest in sort of larger capabilities that include low code, no code, but also sort of to improve the communication between business analysts and business testers to the developers on the same team. And that actually leads to some organizations to think about, like, how do we blend unit and end-to-end system testing together? So it's not like developers say, hey, works fine on my machine, my build worked fine, throw it over the fence differently to make it somebody else's problem, but to actually say, you know what, unit testing is not enough. You also need to think about, like, how does it work in context, because we're all building functionality in parallel. And so there's always going to be some sort of implication or side effect potentially on other units or other functions, and that needs to be detected early on, including business analysts.
Fair. We had a comment in the Q&A, which is for the panel, but I'm going to throw it out to our whole audience, right? Some specific examples of how DevOps practices and tools have improved the efficiency and effectiveness of your team's software development and deployment processes, right? Because ultimately, guys, this is all fine and dandy, kumbaya, but is it hitting the bottom line, right? Am I saving money, making more money? Is it, why is it better for my business? Because it's a business thing. So I realize with the three of you, being actually tool vendors, but a lot of times you guys eat your own dog food, right? Some of the biggest DevOps successes I've seen are the DevOps being done at tool vendors. IBM's a great example. IBM was on a big kick adopting DevOps for a while. Any examples or?
Yeah, so to call that out, eat your own dog food. We're using OS, so StackState is a SaaS offering, and we're using StackState to observe our customers. And the fun part, every time when you enter a demo, right, we have our playground that we demo, and then sometimes people ask the real questions, right? How does it look for real? And then it's so simple to flip over to your own production instance, right, that my operations engineers are using, and say, hey, but if you would use it for real, this is how it looks like, right? So the fact that we forced our engineers to use our own product also dramatically improved our offering, because all of a sudden people start to realize, hey, this really need to work well together. So that is a mechanism I really believe can work very well.
Fair. Martin, Hope, any examples you guys, and if not your own organizations, maybe organizations you've dealt with through your positions at Tricentis?
Yeah, we would definitely try to be down dog food as much as possible. Surprisingly, I think we have similar conversations with our own IT organization as well. Like how do we use our own tools more effectively when we implement, deploy, back office enterprise applications, not just on the R&D side, which is naturally more inclined to use automation anyways. The one thing I would say is, Alan, you made a really good point that a lot of companies don't really sort of measure and tie back feature deployments to business value. I think there's a huge opportunity here across the industry to better correlate, like, what are we doing in terms of engineering and R&D investments that drive business value, either from a top line revenue growth standpoint or from a bottom line cost saving standpoint, and really look at like features and the capabilities we've added. How has it driven more better business outcomes, and then do more of that and think about like how do we sort of create a feedback loop on that. We actually almost didn't do it when we migrated from an on-prem to like a cloud-based service for some of our products, but luckily we did. And one thing that we actually did, and that turned out to be very helpful, is start with performance as one way to measure the before and after. So we did a performance assessment. From a scalability standpoint, we ran all sorts of load tests to see how the application behaves at different load levels, and then we used that as a benchmark to compare the new system that was basically cloud-based, because ultimately we wanted to achieve an improvement and definitely not a regression in terms of delivering less capabilities or less performance than before, and also in terms of like fungibility of resources. Demands has shifted over time, so our resources were optimized for the actual load on the test.
Agree with all points. And internally, one of the best things about using your own tools is you feel the pain before everyone else. You know where people will get stuck. You have heard already, the challenges that it presents before you ship, and it gives you that opportunity to make sure that you ship a good product. So for me, that is one of the highest values that all the other things roll up under, right? Yeah. That firsthand experience to see it first and fix it first.
But also in your rollout strategy. So if I take a look at our rollout strategy, there's a nightly, there's master, then there's a nightly environment, then there's our own production environment, then there's the open playground, and then there are the customer instances. Right. So to your point, we go through the pain first, right? Even before we ship it to the customer. And that can be a daily cadence, right? Every environment is promoted one day beyond the other. So you can have daily deployments, but they're kind of sequenced to feel the pain first before it hits the customer. Absolutely worldwide. Yeah.
Sure. Hey, just a little side note. Someone had wrote in chat that they just joined and they asked if the recording will be available. Yes, these are all recorded. They are available on both Techstrong.tv as well as I think on DevOps.com. If you go to past webinars and stuff, it'll be up there. So I wanted to get that out of the way. Guys, while I'm doing housekeeping, let me also mention, if you go to the handout section of your communication panel, so where it says chat, QA, polls, handouts, you'll see two things there. Number one was the link for that Hope was kind enough to mention, I believe, and we've got the link in there for you. Number two, though, is and I really mean it is 1 minute. A 1 minute survey we put into all of these, because the only way we get better is hearing from you about what you think is better and what you want to see, and we aim to please. And So please take the time, take the survey, and let us know so that we can continue improving these and making them more useful to you. Mitch, you asked a question of the audience, which is, what do you wish DevOps would help you do that it's not good at today? Where should DevOps help next? I'll throw that out to the panel as well. Where do you guys think it should go? What do you think it doesn't do well?
I think it doesn't. It's not great at self-promotion. It feels as if it's one of those areas where, because DevOps as a culture is trained to find and resolve problems, it seems in some organizations it's seen as part of the problem versus the thing that is the messenger is getting killed sometimes, right? Versus seeing it as something that is surfacing those problems early, the connection between DevOps and Agile, find out the problem early, fix the problem early, deliver customer value. So somehow people in leadership, people who are not right there at the table, being able to translate it better for them so they really understand the value.
Fair?
If I can comment, I don't think I had to think about it, because I would say internally, and then internally, I mean, in the DevOps teams, in the engineering teams, even in organizations, it goes pretty well. Where I do think we struggle is what we touched upon earlier. What is the impact of what we do on the outside world? Probably more important, on the end customer. So what we noticed more and more, right, in observability is people are easily to talk about SLIs, service level indicators, SLOs, objectives. But what about the service level agreement, right? Which is the customer engagement that we're having. So if I could put a wish on the table, is that we learn to truly start looking outside. Probably we don't need more or faster builds, right? Or whatever, right? But reliability is more important, because that has an impact on the customer. So probably a little bit less inward focus on culture, on tools, on process, and much more towards the outside world, taking the customer aspect into account, and then asking ourselves the question, what does it mean to us?
Absolutely. We had a question from Nadia to the presenters. A statement as well, but methodology, framework, trends come and fade away with new technologies. Do you think we need enhancements in DevSecOps, DevOps in near-term future with things like AI advancement and in terms of observability? So I'm going to take first crack at this, if it's okay, and then you guys feel free to hop on. No doubt about it, AI is already having and will have a bigger even influence on how we do software, how we deploy, how we observe, how we manage IT in general, if not our lives altogether. And certainly observability as an area has become a very big aspect of DevOps. It's, of course, very big in cloud native. But the beauty of DevOps, and I'll give Patrick Dubois and the early folks credit on this, is they resisted having a manifesto like Agile. They resisted having I'm sorry, my phone went off there. They resisted having even a firm definition of what DevOps was. And there was a lot of grief back then. How could you not even define it? If you can't define it, it can't be real. But the fact is, by doing that, it's let it evolve and morph to adapt to whatever's out there. Platform engineering, SRE, AI. Yeah, AI is built into my IDE now. I got all these co-pilots. AI is built into my testing. How do I make my figure out my testing coverage and stuff? And observability, right? The observability feeds right into the feedback loops, right? That are right out of, DevOps 101. And so I do think what DevOps has shown over the last 10 to 12 years is an amazing adaptability to absorb, like an amoeba, right? All of these new technologies and ways of doing things. So, that's my 2 cents on that one. I don't know if you guys feel any differently.
Well, I'm happy that the sentence ends with AI and observability. I do think the hype can be super big, right? For an LLM to be successful, right, it still needs a little bit of structured input and a little bit of good prompting. And we're experimenting, obviously, with a lot of the AI models from Google and from ChatGPT. But the fascinating part, it is not necessarily about your prompt. It's really about the base input, right? What you can get out of it. Where we see it at this early stage of generative AI is extremely helpful, is to translate difficult charts and difficult Kubernetes events and difficult test result outputs into plain English, right? To make it human understandable, to summarize it, etc. I do feel that is an area where it's already really good at, but then it depends on a humongous structured data input to get to accurate results. I'm not yet a believer that we can go that far in a year's time from now, that all the auto healing and auto remediation, you have observability AI, and then it saves the world, right? I do think that's a little too early. We're certainly trending into that direction, but making it understandable for humans, I think that's where generative AI at this moment in time can be extremely helpful in any tooling category that we have in our DevOps or DevSecOps space. I don't know what about the others.
Yeah, let's be clear. I mean, AI is going to be a step function improvement in terms of the tooling overall, right? But it's not going to solve all our problems. This goes back to the culture tools question we had earlier today, that tools and AI are enabling teams. They're meant to enhance automation, to make things easier, make things faster, make things more consistent. Yeah. And so it's a means to an end. It's not the end state. It's going to help us, understand code better. It helps us write code better. It helps us automate more testing, do more with less time. And I think there's definitely an evolution that's taking place still in terms of figuring out what is the real value and the use cases where we can trust it in a way that it actually adds value, not just, creates more work down the line, because every new technology tends to also introduce new problems later at a high level or later stages. But I do think that, Alan, to your earlier question, that we need to always make sure that we think about what we're doing also from a business context, right? And how do we create value for customers? That was the ultimate goal for DevOps all along. Like, how do we make it, start with the user in mind, and then work backwards, and how do we sort of, deliver faster with more consistency, right? And in my view, we need to think not just sort of metrics in terms of deployment frequency and, CSD pipeline runs and all these things, but really think about what is the value from a business standpoint, because ultimately that will help us communicate what we're doing to, executives and senior leaderships. It helps sort of clarify a lot of things. And ultimately it's all about what are we here for, what are we trying to accomplish, and how we're doing it. I think we have got that figured out pretty well, but at the end of the day, it's all about, like, what are we doing for our customers and why we're doing it.
A couple of things that have come to mind for me. One, Martin, agreeing with you, but going a little deeper. So for me, in an ideal world, where AI is right now, to me, is matched with the purpose of automation. Do you automate everything? No, you automate the repetitive things, the things that are just consuming developer time, and it's the same task over and over again, right? No. If we can push AI on those things first, then that leaves a lot of room to consider, what are the other possibilities for what developers can do. And yesterday, I was shown a study that I didn't know about, and if I could find it right now, I would share it. But I think it was in Europe, it was in Europe, when Italy banned ChatGPT. Someone looked at how much code was written before the ban, how much it dropped off when the ban was in place. It was a significant shift. So a lot of developers are using it like a pair programming tool.
Yep.
Someone who can sit there with them and help them, brainstorm and think through what some of those possibilities are. So it's a creative tool, but it can also be a very functional tool to help just relieve some of the toil.
Absolutely. Guys, I'd love to talk all day with this. This is a fantastic panel, a fantastic audience. Unfortunately, I got to run over to the Techstrong studios here and record another interview. So I have to pull the plug on this. Andreas, Hope, Martin, thank you so much for coming on our panel. Mitch, this was a fun one, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. And our audience was killing it. I mean, talking about some great questions.
Oh, yeah, there was a lot of conversations going on there.
I
couldn't join in all of them. But you know what? We love DevOps. And we got DevOps. Stay tuned. This campaign we're running called Got DevOps. I'm going to ask all of you. I want to see 10-second videos, 12-second videos about why you got DevOps, why you love DevOps, what DevOps means to you. Hashtag Got DevOps. We want Got DevOps to be trending. And it's all hopefully going to come together with Mitch's DevOps Next Techstrong research report, and we're aiming for March, April, and into May with that. So stay tuned for more news. But for now, this is Alan Schimmel on behalf of Techstrong, as well as our friends at Tricentis. Thank you for joining us for another DevOps Unbound, and we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
See you.